All right, folks, it is time for our favorite podcast, Cut to the Chase. And I want to reveal a little dirty secret that a lot of you listeners have attorneys, or you're thinking of hiring an attorney. Who do I hire? Oh, this guy or this gal's great. And then what you find out is, oh my God, this attorney has no trial experience, or they've tried 3 cases, or they haven't tried a case in 5 years. And you're like, what? Does that make a difference? Let me tell you, it makes a humongous difference. If you want to get fair value for your case, the other attorneys are only going to get you fair value if they know that your attorney will go to court, will go to trial, and will kick big time booty. Okay. And so I brought Eric Fong on. I'm in Miami Beach. He's the entire opposite location of the United States and the state of Washington. Eric has had over 100 trials in his 25 plus years as an attorney, 2 verdicts. Okay. He got the largest compensatory damage verdict in the state of Washington, over $90 million a few years ago. We're going to talk about that case and a couple of other cases, and he's going to weave in a lot of like best practices for attorneys that are listening here that, you know, need to up their game and need to get themselves in court at trial. Eric, that was a long-winded explanation. How are you doing?
Dude, I love it. Gregg, you touched on something that I'm curious, where it came from, but this idea that lawyers can represent people and not know how to do a jury trial. It's a constitutional right. It's a bedrock of this country, right? And it's the right to have big matters of importance that are decided by the people. This group of people come together to make decisions that are more powerful than the governor or even the president or the legislature can do. And the fact of the matter is that lawyers are terrified of this process. It's scary, it's hard, it's complicated. It's a process that is really hard to explain because it's storytelling, it's logic, it's emotion, it's relationships and understanding space. And so your introduction just kind of like brought goosebumps to my skin because it's what I do for a living and it's what I love. And I appreciate your recognition of the importance of it.
There's in the news recently, in the mass tort space, a lot of the big Fortune 500 companies are filing for bankruptcy, even though they're really not in financial distress. And us mass tort lawyers are furious because essentially what that does is takes away lots of people's constitutional right to a jury trial by their peers, in front of their peers, to decide who's right, who's wrong, and how much compensation, instead of letting the bankruptcy trustee, squeeze everybody to pennies or whatever. So this is becoming, from what I see, a major battle, securing this constitutional right. And if we don't have people like you going out there and trying the cases and following through, then everybody's going to suffer, except for the bad guys, I think. That's just my take.
Well, no, it's a big take. And the structure of laws are designed to protect the power. The laws are designed by the power structure and the people that have it. And these firewalls that are created by the companies to cling to their assets and money, right? They're good at it. And it is so disheartening when, you truly believe with every ounce of your being that we have to be doing better than what we're doing. And you have a cause that you believe in and you're right and the law's on your side. And subjectively, some judge or some strategy takes all of that away by a legal decision, or in what you're talking about, some complicated, sophisticated bankruptcy scheme to walk away from your past, and yet keep the profits of your looting. So, man, there's a lot that goes on beneath the surface that are hard to express, right?
Yeah.
And that is there's a lot of unfairness that we have to deal with, and heartbreak that, somehow we have to explain to our clients.
And a lot of times attorneys give their clients bullshit reasons why they should take the money and settle it. And a lot of times it's understandable. Every case has its warts. Every case is perfect as it is. Something could go awry. The jury might not like you. They might not like your shoes. They might not like the way you're walking, and they might punish your client. And that does happen. And it's unfortunate. But I still subscribe to my opinion that, and a lot of people share this, that this constitutional right, this system is better than letting judges or bankruptcy judges, basically decide what's going on and how the final result is going to be.
Amen, brother. And I don't think if we were all honest, there's not a lawyer out there that hasn't compromised or settled a case because of our shit and the stuff that we have going on that's preventing us from stepping into that courtroom when it's all on the line.
Part of the trial process, there's so many moving parts. You're interviewing jurors, potential jurors, to see if there's biases. At the same time, you're trying to persuade them to listen to you. You're trying to get the judge to rule in your favor. You're trying to move evidence into the court record. You're trying to apply the laws that evidentiary, rulings, procedure, all these things are going on at the same time. And it really takes a tremendously talented person like you, and then you got to sleep at night, you can't not sleep. So you got a 5-week trial, whatever, a million things are going on in your mind. That's a talent in of itself, I think, all right, but I want to get right into the first case. Okay. The main case, the case that I know you know you from, $91 million verdict, Will Tillsdale. And it's on a special topic from my heart, which is negligent. Some of us call it negligent security, inadequate security. Hey, listen, if you own a property or whatever, you should listen to this story, because you might not realize that you can't just have a rifle in your 7-Eleven store and say, well, if somebody comes in, I'm just going to take the rifle off and blow their head off or whatever. You have to have adequate security, and you should do more than that. Have good security for your customers, your employees, and everybody that's coming into the property. But let's talk about Will Tillsdale and your $91 million verdict. Start from the beginning. How did you get the case, and what happened?
I got the case. It's a case I don't think most lawyers would take. Guy goes into a convenience store, and a robber takes a baseball bat and bludgeons his head, right? And what the company do? What a robber's going to do that? And oh, by the way, your guy ran up to him and confronted him when he was trying to get away in your car. It's not a case. But I got it. My intern, I had an intern working with me, and it was her brother-in-law. And she's like, hey, you should look into this case. I don't know if it's there or not. And I was like, sure, I'd be happy to meet with him and talk to him. And I went to his apartment, and there's these moments when you walk in and you see people and it takes your breath away, right? Because of the profound suffering. A quadriplegic or someone who's, I don't know, I do criminal law, and you walk into the jail cell, and the day before the person was having their normal life, and that day they're charged with murder. There's these moments where the atmosphere is so thick and heavy that it's hard to move through you. And this was one of those moments. I'll never forget how he looked, because he was messed up. And I knew enough about convenience stores that they get robbed at 2 a.m. And I have convenience stores around this county, this town, where I'm not going to go to it, because the parking lot is the hangout place for people that, frankly, make me a little bit nervous by the way they look at me and the way I drive up and get out of the car. Right? There's some uneasiness that I carry, and so I kind of ordered all the police. First thing I did was order all the police reports from that location. And sure enough, the police are called to that place hundreds of times in the last year or two. There's a homeless encampment on the property. I went and got a private investigator to go, track down prior employees, and they bring weapons to court to the store to defend themselves, and someone to work with them at night because they feel dangerous. And so I just started working the case up with duty. So it's an invitee, a business invitee, a special relationship. The business has to a duty to protect their customers from foreseeable harm. I looked into this idea of convenience stores getting robbed at night, because it just, with the criminal law and public defense thing, they're always showing up, you know?
Yeah.
So it just kind of took off from there.
All right, let's talk about like the owners. You know, you're telling me that their employees are like scared enough that they're bringing in weapons to protect themselves. Is this like a mom and pop shop that just is struggling
Yeah.
to stay afloat? Or is this like, what was
Well, there's franchises and firewalls for big companies to protect themselves are a pretty common thing for financial holdings, which is what convenience stores are. They make money by selling gasoline, cigarettes, and alcohol. Okay, let's not mince meat about what these businesses do and how they make money. They got a good deal going on. And it just so happened that this one's one of the largest chains in the country, and it's owned by Fortress Investment, that's owned by SoftBank, right? So it's a financial holding for financial institutions, really. And it's an investment platform. And it took me years, by the way, to kind of like figure out who am I dealing with? You know, they own the trucks that deliver the gas, they own the land that enters into a lease with the business. And there were 4 or 5 entities that kept showing up over and over again that had some kind of interest in this business or this property. And I figured that out, but it's a very large corporation that is running this store that is shameful, from my perspective. And that jury agreed.
All right. So what happened to Will? Was he going over there to get gasoline?
He was getting Gatorade. His apartment that I met him in was right next to this gas station. He was going in there to get Gatorade, and unknown to him, he walked into a very dangerous situation. There was a robbery, and the science behind robberies and why robbers pick stores, I don't want to get into the weeds on it, but it's pretty predictable. It has to do with lighting and visibility. And the clerk, the number one reason why people get hurt in robberies are the actions of the clerk. Don't be the hero. Give them the cigarettes. Have a good day. Yeah. Well, the clerk was trying to be a hero, and he was fighting, but struggling with the robber. And then he involved my client. He said, call 911. And so my guy gets on the phone, the robber walks out. And when he was on the phone, because there was nothing that he could see, he sees that someone's in his car. So he goes up to his car, and it was the robber trying to get away. And he takes out the baseball bat and,
oh my God,
and just bludgeons it's a disturbing, sickening scene.
That's horrible. So a lot of, you've used a couple of words of legal significance. I think some people would just presume, okay, well, you sued the person that hit your client. That almost killed your client.
Okay.
Why are you suing the store owner and not that person?
Yeah, I mean, so there you go. Okay. The restatement of torts, right? Common law is kind of like all cobbled together to basic kind of principles of duties that the restatement summarizes or adopts a position on. And if you have a special relationship to someone, you have a duty to protect them from foreseeable harm, even if it's criminal third-party activity. A bar can't get someone drunk and then let the guy drive away drunk and then blame the drunk driver. A priest, a church can't keep a priest on their property who they know is continually doing crazy things with the congregation. I could go on and on about these kind of special relationships. In Washington, you don't get to, if you are aware of a risk that you're creating in a third party, you do not get to apportion or put some blame on that third party. You created the risk, you're responsible for it, period. So we did not sue the robber, because if you sue him, then you bring up joint and several, like complicated division of responsibility issues. Leave him out of the picture. One theory, negligence only. Was it a proximate cause? And that's why we didn't sue the robber based on Washington law as it then existed. I will tell you that I'm heartbroken because the Court of Appeals, we just lost. We just lost this verdict.
Yeah. You just told me this right before we started. Terrible. We're going to get into that, but before we get into that, I want to go through a little bit more. You know, you're talking about foreseeability. That, so are you saying that this criminal act, you know, somebody coming in, robbing the store and then attacking a patron was foreseeable? In other words, it's something that the reasonable landowner should have suspected something like this is going to happen based upon the history of the property. Is that essential?
Oh, absolutely. Two things. Absolutely. Yes, unequivocally. Every state in this country has mandatory, it's so common, late night robberies on late night establishments, that you have to take affirmative steps to prevent it from happening. So there's no question that stores that are open 24 hours a day are going to get victimized at night.
Yeah.
It's just a fact, and it's science. The other duty, by the way, is the duty to warn. When Will walked out of the store, the clerk had almost 15 seconds to say, "Don't go outside. That was a robber with a baseball bat who just threatened to kill me."
Yeah.
He should have said, "Stay in the store. It's not safe out there." So those were the two kind of duties: the failure to warn and the failure to prevent foreseeable criminal conduct by a robber, which I know sounds crazy, but you know, when you get into it, it makes perfect sense and it's pretty obvious.
Now, a lot of the viewers have heard of, you know, 7-figure, 8-figure, 9-figure verdicts. You're in the high 8 figures, but that was just compensatory. Explain like compensatory versus punitive, and why you didn't go after punitives here, and if that was even an option.
Well, it wasn't an option because in Washington does not have punitive damages.
Yeah.
And so compensatory damages is strictly, you know, the loss of a human being, the suffering, the pain and suffering of the person. Whereas punitive damages is, in addition to that, to punish the conduct so that it doesn't happen in the future.
Yeah.
And that's where you get the big verdicts, right? The punitive damages, because juries we've lost the capacity to care for each other. Like human beings, like we've devolved into some nasty place where we've stopped caring. And so it's hard to get a compensatory verdict that's worth anything because jurors, me, you are not connecting and appreciating other people.
Yeah. And you suffer yourself, and why should this person, you know, get compensated? I haven't been compensated for all the harms that happened to me, you know, and so that plays into it, you know.
You just traumatized me. You pick enough juries, you're going to hear that. Well, my back hurts and no one gave me money.
Yeah. Well, that's why you got to be good at picking a jury and getting them out. So what were his injuries and how is he doing now, Will?
Well, his injuries are really disturbing. It's a sickening video. It's all on video. So the force, Will's head split from the base of the neck to the eye. Just,
oh my God.
You know, and the forces of that are like the equivalent of a refrigerator being dropped on your head. The skull is designed like magnificently to protect the brain, just like the vertebrae and the like our spinal cord is protected, right? Everything is done inside of us to preserve our brain. And there was right side holohemispheric bleeding. There was subdural, intracranial bleeding, midline shift, like the whole right side of his head from right at the surface all the way in just bled. And his memory and attention bottom out. You know, he's like you ask him to do something that involves more than one step processing, he won't be able to do it.
Yeah.
He has intense, as you might imagine, depression, anxiety, all the things that go with TBI, headache, sensitivity to light, sound, tinnitus. He crushes the worst, you know, he's the thoughts of what's the point of living?
Yeah.
And he has an uncontrolled grand mal seizure disorder that is terrifying.
Yeah.
Terrifying. He just had one and fell and knocked his head open and needed 5 stitches. I mean, it's
Horrible.
it's a miserable existence.
Yeah. How old is he?
He's 34 now.
Yeah. Wow. That's just a terrible story.
But
So
let me just say this though, okay?
Yeah.
The guy, you talk about reserves and resiliency and the human capacity to persevere in faith and hope. And he is an inspiration to me as an example of purpose and meaning, of something more that's out there. And he's got a loving family that supports him, and they all come together to love one another. And so as bad as his life is, and the difference between what we think we should be and who and what we actually are, right? Like in our mind, I want to be this, but the reality is I'm actually very far from that. That's a measure of pain. You following me?
Absolutely.
So what you think you should be, and that's like envy or dreaming, or you're just out to lunch, or something bad happens to you like him, where it was taken. And what you actually have, which is, maybe failure or just a brain injury, or I'm broke, but I pretend like I'm rich. That difference of what you think you should be or what you want to be and what you really are is the gap that we have to do as individuals to live a meaningful life.
Yeah.
And he fills that gap as best he can, recognizing that he lost out when he walked into that store, but he's living his life right now as the best he can. And it's actually an incredible thing.
Yeah. So when we first scheduled this podcast, the appellate decision had not come down. So it really wasn't even anticipated. I thought you were just going to say the case is on appeal, but now I know that so the appellate court what happened? What was their ruling?
Well, they did a pretty radical thing. And they determined that the pattern jury instructions, the Supreme Court issues pattern instructions for scenarios, that the pattern instructions that we use, this is a squeaky clean record. I've tried a lot of cases. I don't push the limits. I want to keep things clean.
Of course, yeah.
The Court of Appeals ruled that the pattern instructions were misleading and prejudicial because it did not let APRO apportion a percentage of damages onto the robber. They basically changed the law in the state.
Yeah.
And it was heartbreaking, like it really, shocking ruling that, we're petitioning the Supreme Court. And it's a huge issue of, right now you're going to have one, it's a radical change to the law. So we're optimistic. I don't see how the Supreme Court doesn't take it, but that's the last thing you want to be saying, right? Oh, I got a good appeal issue.
Yeah. Well, all right, we're going to be positive here for Will and for you.
Yeah.
But I'm going to kind of slow this down a little bit. So I think pretty much every state has their own standard jury instructions that the Supreme Court or some committee that they put together creates, and they base this upon years and years of analysis and court decisions and the restatements of law and all this. And so you followed, in your case, the judge read those exact instructions, and then the appellate court, so there's 2 levels of appeals in Washington. There's the Washington Supreme Court, which you're petitioning to now. And what do you call the lower level court that just issued
the Court of Appeals?
Court of Appeals. Okay. So I've handled some negligent security cases, and I understand that the bad person, the robber, the person that hits or kills the innocent victim is what we call the intentional tortfeasor. And you're suing for negligence. And the only reason, when negligence is the theory, well, there could be 5 different things that were negligent and caused the injury. Yeah. And so the jury has to say, well, the store owner was 90% and the shopping attendant was 10% or whatever. And you got to decide, jury. But but that's only for negligence. So
Yeah.
I'm holding out hope that I think that that is, blatant, like law school, law student wouldn't make that bad ruling.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I mean, first of all, you're right. And there may be more than one proximate cause, right? And so what you're saying is exactly right. So then the question is, well, how? How can three really smart appellate judges kind of step into a controversy like this that changes the law in the state? And there's a reasonable explanation for how they got fooled by the defense argument, right? The defense completely misrepresented the law. And if you sue the intentional actor in Washington, if they are an actual party in the lawsuit, then the negligent party gets to go through this process to apportion damages and liability onto the intentional actor. And this court got confused. They decided the wrong case with the wrong law.
Yeah.
And it really is that simple. And you have to believe that when the motion to reconsider, the light bulbs went off, and it's like, oh my God, like, how did we find ourselves in this situation? Because this case is directly in conflict with facts directly on point. I mean, with the Supreme Court, no less. So we are confident. We have major players that are supporting the public justice, NAACP, the Washington State Association of Justice, and the National Crime Victims Association on board in supporting the petition, because this is a big change to the law that allows this big bad corporation to offload its responsibility onto my client and the intentional actor who can never pay it.
Yeah.
It totally undercuts the special duty relationship and wipes out a huge area of law in this state.
Yeah. And I think that you're going to win. That's my thought, and maybe a year from now, whatever, you're going to come back and give us a good story. All right. So I want to move on to a couple of other Mr. Fong here is not just famous for this one case or the 100+ jury verdicts that he's had already, criminal and civil, but I also hear that NPR is following another one of your cases that sounds equally, I don't know, equally disturbing, but disturbing as well.
I think it's more disturbing.
Yeah.
I think it hard to say. What makes a thing disturbing to me is the level of trust and faith that we have in other people and the manner with which they hold that and protect it and cradle it. And an oil company, a convenience store, a financial holding trying to, cut measures at the expense of human safety doesn't really surprise me. You expect it. You know what I mean? Like the big business is going to do what they can to make money at the expense of the human being every time. The case you're talking about is a murder. I represent a person accused of murder, raping his sister and murdering her. Okay, this is ugly, ugly stuff. And it's a high profile. It's all over the news locally here. And well, what happens if a government employee has a long history of being incapable of being objective, and in fact is so jaded in the view of the world, they go out of their way to construct a case to convict someone? And it is entirely possible that I represent a person that is 100% innocent and is the victim of a government agent incapable of looking at something objectively, and all they can see is guilt, guilt, guilt. And there's a string now of cases of this county and other counties where this person is under intense investigation for doing just that. It's a coroner that is all over the place right now. And there's audits of her cases, and it's pretty clear that there are now concrete findings that cases are being dismissed because of the failure of that trust. And I believe this case is one of those.
Okay, so coroner. So you're talking about the person that goes through the body, the dead person, and decides the cause of death.
Yeah.
And so what are they doing? What is this person doing? Well, why don't you say this person's name? You know, in the event that this person actually is doing it, they should be completely exposed. And I'm sure you're right. I just can't even imagine this story coming about if there wasn't, you know, with this
Well,
fire.
yeah, well, I mean, what I can say is we have hired a forensic pathologist that is pretty reputable in the country, frankly. And there's just books on, lividity and rigor mortis and, how things, the petechiae, basic kind of common sense things that happen under certain causes of death or injuries. You're just going to happen to see certain things every single time. If you hit me in the arm hard enough, I'm going to bleed. If you crack my head with a baseball hard enough, I'm going to suffer a brain injury. If you, in the absence of certain findings, you can say pretty certainly that certain things didn't happen. Or if you have certain findings, you can say that this, what you think is actually happening, couldn't have happened because this is going on. And the doctor's name is Dr. Quinn, and she is currently embroiled in massive controversy in multiple counties in Western Washington that specifically have to do with the thoroughness and credibility of the work. And in this case, we have a forensic pathologist that we have at this point pointed out to the prosecutor's office, this is impossible. Your theory of the case and your allegations are impossible by science. And you just have to have faith and hope that as you go up the ladder, that the responsibility and the ethics and our obligation to each other, particularly at that level, will step in and do the right thing.
Yeah. Wow. So when you say that NPR is following the story, what do you anticipate them doing with the story? Is it gonna be on TV, podcasts?
I'll tell you, I paused when you asked, well, who is it or what have you. I have a very overly, I have a complicated relationship with the media. Let me put it to you that way. I have a huge level of distrust. And when you talk to the media, you better have your talking points down and stick within it. Yeah. And you better know what you're going to say beforehand, and you better be very tight-lipped, anything beyond the message and the frame you want to say. And frankly, you should hire a media publicist to help you do this.
Yeah. Completely.
Right? And this is something you got to learn the hard way.
Yep. And
it's not about you or what you think the case is. It's about what they got going on and what story they want to sell or put out there. And you never really know, right? Until it comes out. And so, I can't answer your question on that. Other than to say that you hope and you would think that it has to do with this trust that we place in government officials that can be taken advantage of or abused.
Yeah. Well, again, I think you're gonna get justice, and I think the prosecutor is going to drop the case. I think you're going to win this one also. The third interesting thing about your work that you're doing is also something, that I think that there's so many problems with the prison system. I mean, I used to handle cases against the private prison industry, and I mean, this isn't but there's so many different problems. And I know that suicide, it's just a horrible place. And, I actually know some people that work for the prison, some friends of mine or whatever, and I know they're good people. And, they don't tell me stories, but I kind of gather from them that there's a lot of bad stuff going on there. So tell us about this third story with the jail suicides that you're involved in.
Well, I've done some civil rights cases that have to do with these corporations that are supposedly providing medicine in the jails, right? So I've done a few of those, and that should be national news, huge story of the corporatization of our jails and the selling of sandals and soap and toothpaste and these companies that are supposedly providing medical care, right? In the prisons and jails of this country. It's a total scandal. 100% corporate fraud again. And this case I have right now, the number one cause of death in jails is suicide. People go to jail, they get sad, and they don't want to live. They're highly worked up. They're in a bad emotional state. They could be coming in off untreated addiction, detoxifying off of whatever, untreated mental illness, right? The correlation between substance abuse and mental illness in jails is, it's off the charts. It's almost guaranteed that someone in there is dealing with that, or mental, or like a stressor in their personal life. So the number one cause of death in jails is suicide. The other thing about the system that we're doing is we're paying all this money to judges and public defenders and prosecutors and police officers, probation officers, the court system, the clerks, the cop cars, right? We are investing an insane amount of money into this system that is designed to punish people to change their behavior. And the people you talked about know it doesn't work. We know scientifically that you do not change behavior by punishment. You want to teach a dog to come, you don't beat the holy crap out of it when it doesn't. You give it a treat and some love when it does. Why do we treat each other any differently, right? And so this case that you're talking about touches something profoundly deep inside of me that is my cause and one of the purposes for me to be alive, which is to bring awareness and attention to a system that I do not believe in. And this young lady, no criminal history, got sideways with drugs. And she goes out and she starts working, and she got hooked on some nasty drugs. And we don't know exactly what it was, but we know that she was using heroin, but it could have been laced or something. But she gets arrested and she gets brought into the jail, and they know right out of the gate there's something really wrong with her. It's a psychiatric emergency. If you've seen people coming off of drugs that are like something misfired, the behavior is unmistakable. It's just an odd, weird, kind of vacant place. Well, her behavior basically is screaming suicide, self-harm, homicidal ideations and thoughts, violence, aggression, attacking, impulsivity, pacing around. And of course, there's intestinal disorder because certain drugs, when you come off of it, that's what happens. They put her on suicide precautions. And what do? Instead of doing any of the things that they say they should have done, they punish her. They punish her in the place of punishment, and they give her 54 days of solitary confinement with a sheet and an anchor point. And everyone that we've talked to has acknowledged they recognize her behavior as that of suicide. They were concerned about it. The minute that happens in a jail, it's done. You are putting them on suicide precautions, and you're gonna care for them and help them and make sure that they don't hurt themselves.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen. And it took them 5 minutes. They find her, and it took them 5 minutes to get on the call to get 911 in there. Inexplicably, no excuse whatsoever. And it's an anoxic brain injury. She lived 15 minutes with no oxygen.
Wow.
And so it's just a senseless thing. And so this is a case where I hope that I'm not, as lawyers, we can love our cases and not be objective. And I hope that I was a public defender for 11 years, and I hope that something I'm so passionate about is not rejected by a group of people. That's we were talking about trying cases, is that you put yourself out there on the line, and when you lose, it's an indictment. It's a rejection of you and your beliefs and your thoughts. And I want so desperately for us as a community to care more for each other. And I see this as a case where we can bring a flashlight and draw attention to a way that we can be better, and that we can do more for each other to, make our communities better. caring, productive.
Listen, Eric, you got a lot going on. This man, justice, perseverance, courage, all wrapped into one. I really appreciate you coming on to the show. I was going to get onto the George Clinton and a lot of the other things that you're doing, but I think these three big cases and campaigns that you're doing, I want to get an update. We're going to circle back at a certain point in time. These are major, major issues. Security, the jails and prisons, having governmental agents that are doctoring up evidence or whatever. We can't have that. We have to be, like you said, with the dog. You've got to give love and attention and treat the dog well if you want the dog to behave well. I think that's a great example. So, Eric, I appreciate you coming on.
Hey, man, thank you for having me. Thank you.
This is the first time I met. I've already feel like I made a deep connection with you. So we'll circle back. All right. And that'll do it for this episode of Cut to the Chase with Eric Fong out in Port Orchard, Washington. So if you're a lawyer in Washington, you think, man, this lawyer is not going to take this case to trial, I'm getting sold out. You could say to your lawyer, hey, listen, why don't you call up Eric and see if he'll help try the case out with you? He might do that, and that might provide even better justice. What do you think about that, Eric?
I love the trial, and my purpose is to help and to heal and to serve, and I get rewarded immensely for doing just that. So would love to hear.
All right, folks, that's it. Be well, and we'll speak soon.